Connor Bedard has gotten, I don't want to say like particularly worse, but the star right now is not as bright as it was a year ago. And that is a thing that needs to be nurtured. Luke Richardson is the third head coach fired this season, joining Jim Montgomery and Drew Bannister. Second coach fired by a Winter Classic team. Anders Sorensen takes over for the Blackhawks. He was coaching the Rockford Ice Hogs, and now the Blackhawks were dead last in the NHL, lost 4 games in a row. Try to kind of clean things up. Pete, surprise on your part? Anything on your part?
No, definitely not surprised. It feels like the right time. I don't know if how like very much like the Jim Montgomery situation. I don't know how much of this is Luke Richardson's fault, but like it has been really ugly in Chicago. It's been really tough to watch. Like you're not seeing the individuals take step forwards. You're not seeing the team as a whole take a step forward, and you're just like toiling in mediocrity. But the difference between this situation and Jim Montgomery is like you have a little bit of the example to pull on that, like, okay, this guy can get the most out of this team. You don't have that with Luke Richardson. He's also in the final year of his current contract. So you may as well just pull the plug and see if somebody else can get a little bit more out of this group, because right now we've kind of mentioned it on the regular show. Like the vibes around the Blackhawks right now are horrible because their young players are looking extremely frustrated. They're not producing, and it just feels like the frustrations are stacking on top of each other, and these guys are not having a good time right now.
And I think if you're Kyle Davidson, it's just the card that you have to play because you did so much this offseason. This was the offseason where you were like, okay, we're going to go out, we're going to get guys. You bring back Teuvo Teravainen, you get Tyler Bertuzzi, a lot of smaller moves like guys like Alec Martinez, but like you show that, okay, we're no longer going to be finishing third to last in the NHL, second to last in the NHL as they did the past 2 seasons. And that's a correct projection if that's what they were thinking, because right now they are last in the NHL. And that's what's wild about the Richardson thing is that they weren't this bad his first year. He was supposed to come in on a kind of suck team, and that suck team did at least have Patrick Kane for part of it until they traded him away. But that was the team that was supposed to be rock bottom-ish. Last year was supposed to be the foundation is being laid. This year was supposed to be this step forward is taken. And instead, it was last year they were worse than the year before. And this year, they were worse than the year before with an asterisk because placement wise, they're worse than they were last year. Statistically, and even basic numbers wise, they're not as bad as they were last year, but they were still supposed to be so much better. They weren't supposed to be a playoff team, but they were supposed to take a step forward. And you mentioned Connor Bedard. He had to be taking a step forward. Our guys from CHGO Blackhawks podcast were discussing the reasons why this happened, and they agreed the biggest thing is like guys can take different steps backward, or the goal scoring can regress, even though again the goal scoring has gotten better, the goals against has gotten better, power play better, penalty kills better. Connor Bedard has gotten, I don't want to say like particularly worse, but the star right now is not as bright as it was a year ago. And that is a thing that needs to be nurtured like nobody's business. You need to make sure that that thing doesn't get messed up. So there are football teams that is like Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. Like with the first sign, you think this guy who is definitely going to be awesome might not end up being awesome because of what we're doing. Pull the plug, change things.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to coddle them, but you do have to take care of them, right? And I had a friend at Luke Richardson's last game, which was against the Bruins, at the Blackhawks Bruins game, and my friend texted me. He was like, Connor Bedard, like literally almost after every shift, is heading back to the bench, either like slamming his stick, hanging his head, and like having these like sort of outbursts. And yeah, you can put that on Bedard and say like he needs to get it together, and he needs to, hold it together a little bit more, be a little bit more professional and learn how to do it. You can also make the case that like if you're a coach, you have to take care of him and make sure that he's not in a place where he's feeling that frustration after every shift. And you have to have a coach who doesn't make him feel that every day going to the rink, especially a guy like Connor Bedard. And we talked a little bit about this. Like, as far as we know about Connor Bedard, like we don't know him super
Easy.
well personally, but everything that we've seen about him is like his entire life is sports and his entire life is being competitive. The We hear time and time again, the only thing that he really, really cares about is playing hockey and going to the rink every day. And if that's not an enjoyable experience for him, I can see how that would wear on him mentally and the frustration would kind of consume him very quickly. And we heard Alex Vlasic tell our friends at CHGO earlier in the season on one of his weekly hits, like it's the first time in his life where he's been on a team that just keeps losing over and over and over and over again. And it's hard to adapt mentally to that. And I would imagine that a lot of that applies to Connor Bedard as well.
What if he's like another Chicago athlete? You know who Connor Bedard is to me? And this is just dawning on me. So maybe it's wrong, but it feels good in this moment. He's Jimmy Butler. When he's in a losing situation and everyone's like, what's he doing? Why is he getting so frustrated? Why is he so mad? And then when he gets in a situation where he can not necessarily like be in charge of things, but like look at what Jimmy Butler was on losing teams versus what he was on competitive teams. Jimmy Butler on competitive teams, everybody's like, you need a Jimmy Butler on your
He's
team.
him.
The
Yeah.
sky is extremely the limit for Connor Bedard. But yeah, right now he's on pace for 16 goals and 44 assists for 60 points. 60 points in year two ain't bad, but the 16 goals you kind of make a face at. So you hope that it gets better there. But as I
And
said,
I hope that that's not misconstrued as like Connor Bedard got Luke Richardson fired or like
no,
he's the
that's not how I
reason
took it.
why he's gone. But like, yeah, it's you mentioned like the shine kind of wearing off Connor Bedard a little bit in year two, and maybe that's the case. But regardless, like Connor Bedard is one of the very like few things that the Blackhawks have going for them right now, and he's not going for them at this point in time, and they need to fix that.
Okay, let's talk about the guy who takes over as head coach, Anders Sorensen, who was a development coach for Chicago for a number of years and then became head coach at Rockford. Before that, I knew him as he was David Pasternak's coach in Södertälje. So he's from Sweden, Swedish dude, was an assistant coach for Södertälje for a number of years. I think got half a season as an interim head coach there before he came over to North America. And we can at least know that he's helped guys develop. I mean, if he's coaching in the AHL, they clearly feel good about him there, but that he was coaching young guys like William Nylander and David Pastrnak once upon a time, and they really liked him a lot. That's encouraging because the coach that I think of that they need, really, whenever there's a head coach opening, we kind of jokingly ask, could this team use Jay Woodcroft? I hate to say it. The Blackhawks are a team where if they ended up getting Jay Woodcroft either at season's end if Sorensen doesn't work out or whenever, like, they are in a position where they need to be growing and they need to be learning. And what's scary about the Blackhawks right now is even with their supplemental pieces they brought in, the veterans they have, this isn't a team that is growing at the rate that it should be. And you have young guys in the AHL right now who are going to be stars in the future for the Blackhawks. So you really need to make sure that that goes well. So Sorensen, I know, is a teacher. Woodcroft, I know, is a teacher. I think that where they are in their process right now, the Blackhawks don't need the who's the guy who's going to get them to the playoffs. They need to be taking steps forward, and they're not taking good ones right now. So I say, yeah, just do the teacher thing. What say you?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that this situation somewhat reminds me of like the Spencer Carberry model for Washington, where like halfway through last year, Washington realized that it really wasn't working with the group that they had, and so like they pulled the plug on a lot of what was happening there, and they were like, let's just bring up the young guys that played for Carberry in Hershey, and like that team was just so much better when they had the teacher teach the young players that maybe were raw but had a little bit in them. And I look at like we haven't seen Frank Nazar, we
Yeah.
haven't like that to me is what is exciting about this is like now you're potentially getting Nazar up and getting a little bit more out of some of these younger guys who have a teacher to help them along. And
He at least knows
if you're
left
the
schnopp
Blackhawks,
too.
and that's going to make you feel better. Like if you're a Blackhawks fan, you need building blocks. You need steps forward. And I think you've probably got a better chance here hitting the reset button, especially with a guy who can teach.
Okay, well, let's also talk about the architect here to invoke the late, or the not the late great. Casey Musgraves is alive. The great Casey
Very
Musgraves.
much
Kyle
alive.
Davidson. Kyle Davidson dropped a new music video this week. Very good. He's the guy that made all these moves the last couple of years. And I don't know that I look at the Blackhawks, and I think this is probably why Richardson's gone. I don't know if this is a like, well, why just sign those guys kind of thing. Like Taylor Hall, I didn't think was going to give you great returns, but when I look at the guys they brought in the last 2 years, the only one who I say, yeah, definitely, and I'm not counting draft picks, is Nick Foligno. Because Nick Foligno rules and he sets a good example for these guys. But are any of the additions, have they really raised the water level in Chicago? Not really. So he's probably next. I just don't know if he's doing a good or bad job.
Yeah, I mean, he had to do something in free agency this summer because you look at the team that they had last year. It was basically a glorified AHL team with Connor Bedard, and then they lost Connor Bedard, and they were quite literally unwatchable without Connor Bedard in that lineup. So like, yeah, I like Tyler Bertuzzi being added there. Like, I like some of the smaller
He's been
names. Like,
back.
I'm not crazy. I know he has, but so is the entire offense. Like they need somebody to unlock the offense because the offense should not be this bad. You look under the hood, they're second to last in goals for per game, and they're dead last in scoring chances and high danger chances per game. And that that can at least be improved. Like they're probably not going to be a good team this year. I think that we can all agree on that, but they can be better. I think that this is a team that's capable of being, uh, at the very least, more exciting. And higher than that, they're capable of being better than the worst team in the league. I truly believe that.
Do you know who the second leading point producer for the Blackhawks is this season?
Uh,
It's someone who's having a career year, but you say shame on a team if this person is your second best player offensively. It's a guy we like.
is it Seth Jones?
It's Ryan
Seth Jones.
Donato, but it could be.
Oh, yeah,
It
that's
could
right.
be
Ryan
Seth
Donato with 10
Jones.
goals. Seth Jones currently out of the lineup, so I was expecting it not to be Seth Jones.
But this team has struggled so much that maybe a guy out of the lineup still lead. I mean, this team is 31st in goals for per game, 2.42 goals, which again was a step in the right direction because last year they were 32nd with 2.17 goals per game. They've improved in all those things. But you're improving from dead last in goals last season, 29th in goals against last season, 28th in power play last season, 27th in penalty kill last season. The special teams have actually been good, 12th in power play, 9th in penalty kill, but 31st in goals, 21st in goals against. And when you watch the games, it's not an inspiring product right now. Obviously,
Well,
they've been losing games like crazy of late.
yeah, but you want to hear the craziest stat of all, which I saw in Mark Lazarus's column yesterday. For a team that's dead last in the NHL, and you just rattled off like how bad they are at 5-on-5, they, in all but one of their 26 games this season, they have been leading, tied, or within one goal in the third period. So, like,
Wow.
they're not getting smoked. They're a competitive hockey team that just frequently loses.
So it's like they lead the league in frustrating losses, and that does get a coach fired.
Yeah, because it's
Almost
like you're
like
there, but why? But what's the piece that's missing that's preventing you from leaving all these points on the table?
I mean, this just happened in Chicago. A football coach got fired where if they didn't play that close a game against Detroit on Thanksgiving, if they didn't come back in that game, he ain't getting fired. But it brings attention when people watch and they say this should be better. But they're having a very tough go of it right now. They do have a lot of young players that we really do like, and we like some of the veterans too. So I hope it turns around. I don't know how much it can turn around this season realistically. I don't think you're looking at the 2019 Blues here, but I do hope that in 3 weeks leading up to the Winter Classic, that at least one of these teams, the Blues and the Blackhawks, and I do hope it's the Blackhawks, has some sort of feeling themselves kind of edge and some sort of spark off this thing, because I don't want doom and gloom around this team, and I definitely don't want it around Connor Bedard.
Yeah, I just think they needed to change something up with these guys going to the rink every day, and I think that you couldn't let it fester, especially when you're not locked in on the guy who's there, and like you don't have a lot of example to say this is our guy, or like we have faith in this guy turning it around, and I just don't think that was attached to Luke Richardson.
We all silly like the mayor.